Salut la Ranger Family, ici Timer, j'espère que vous allez bien. Cette vidéo est un petit peu incroyable et je vous avoue que je ne m'attendais pas du tout à pouvoir faire ce genre de vidéo quand j'ai commencé ma chaîne YouTube il y a tout juste 2 ans. Si cette vidéo a été possible, c'est surtout grâce à vous et je tiens à tous vous remercier pour votre fidélité. Mais celui que je remercie tout particulièrement, c'est l'incroyable Clément. C'est le super présentateur de PowerRangers, le podcast. Il a osé contacter Simon Bennett pour lui demander une interview. Et vous savez quoi? Eh ben ça a marché. Clément a eu la gentillesse de m'intégrer à l'interview et nous avons pu discuter avec Simon Bennett pendant 2 heures. Nous avons abordé son travail sur la franchise Power Rangers avec des détails croustillants sur Dino Fury, Toujours vers le futur, et la dernière saison, Cosmic Fury. Merci aussi à ceux qui nous ont envoyé quelques questions. Et je pense tout particulièrement à mes camarades du podcast, Mousco, Altarian, AC et Arthur. Mais avant qu'on commence, n'oublie pas de t'abonner à la chaîne pour ne louper aucune vidéo. Vous êtes prêts? Moi je sais pas. Allez, c'est parti! Bonjour Simon. Puis-je vous appeler Simon?
Please do.
Merci de nous donner un peu de votre temps pour discuter des Power Rangers. Je pense, mais j'ai peut-être tort, que c'est la première interview du showrunner de la série dédiée uniquement au public français. Et je vous remercie énormément pour cette incroyable opportunité.
You are most welcome.
Vous avez commencé à travailler sur Power Rangers avec Ninja Steel et c'est à partir de Dino Fury que vous êtes devenu showrunner, puis sur Toujours vers le futur et enfin Cosmic Fury. La 30e et dernière saison est disponible sur Netflix depuis le 29 septembre et je dois bien avouer que c'est une très belle preuve d'amour à tous les fans de Power Rangers. Cette saison nous prouve ce que Power Rangers peut être lorsqu'elle écrit ses propres histoires et suit son propre développement. Mais avant toute chose, pouvez-vous nous expliquer en quoi consiste le rôle de showrunner d'une série comme Power Rangers et comment toute la production fonctionne?
Okay, it is a complicated job because I've got my fingers in every aspect of the show. The best way to describe a showrunner would be the person who is creatively responsible for the program overall. My work begins with the writers, so I work with them on developing the stories and the characters and the scripts of a season. And then it moves into pre-production, when I will work with the designers on designing the sets and the props and the costumes and all the world that needs to be designed for the season. And I'm also responsible for hiring all the heads of department. I'm involved in the casting process in conjunction with my colleagues in the States. And then once we're into production, I hire the directors and I brief the directors. And I keep a very close eye on the rushes of what's being filmed every day. And I may give feedback to the directors or the actors about how things are going during the shoot. And the director will have a director's cut of each episode, and then after that it's handed over to me, and I'm responsible for the producer's cut, which then gets ultimately approved and locked, and then I manage the visual effects and the whole post-production process. So I'm working with the visual effects artists and designers and the composer and the sound post-production people and the person who is writing the ADR scripts. And also I attend a lot of the ADR recording sessions with the actors. I'll attend the final mix of the episode and the final online edit. So, and then it's delivered. So basically I am responsible for every aspect of the production, from the idea to the delivery. And along the way, I'm working with a whole lot of very talented, creative and imaginative colleagues. And that is a huge part of the fun of the job.
Incroyable! Donc en fait, vous avez commencé à redormir il y a tout juste une semaine, c'est ça?
Well, my contract was a 7-day per week contract. I didn't actually have technically a day off. I was on call the whole time. And when we were in production, when we were shooting, I would be looking after the pre-production of the episodes that were about to shoot, keeping an eye on the production of the episodes that were shooting, and across post-production of the episodes that had been completed. So that's the busiest time for me, and I would say I would start sometimes 6:30 in the morning, and I would keep working through until 8 or 9 o'clock at night. So it was a very time-consuming job, and stressful, but balanced by the fact that it's hugely enjoyable, and I loved working on the show. It was a lot of fun, and I'd do it again if I had the chance, and I actually can't think of a more enjoyable job. So I feel very fortunate that I was able to do that.
Votre première expérience avec Power Rangers était lors de la saison Ninja Steel. Comment avez-vous rejoint l'équipe de production?
Well, I joined as a director in 2016, and I'd been a director and producer in New Zealand for many years. And I'd never worked on Power Rangers, but I knew crew who I'd worked with who had done Power Rangers. A number of them had said to me, "Oh, you should put your hand up and put yourself down to do Power Rangers. You'd love it. You'd be really good at it." So I contacted Sarah Spurway, the line producer, who organised an interview for me with Chip Lynn, who was the executive producer at the time. And we had a sit-down interview, and he looked at my CV and obviously thought it was worthwhile giving me a chance. And so I started directing. I think my first episodes were the introduction of Levi Weston in Ninja Steel. So it was his first block of episodes. Very vivid memories of having to learn a huge amount about how to make Power Rangers, because it is a unique thing and unlike any other show I'd worked on. But also having a great time and knowing that I was working with a very capable crew, people at the top of their game, because you have to be, because the actual complexity of shooting the show is high.
En effet, j'allais justement vous demander s'il y avait des instructions spécifiques à suivre, ou des éléments à éviter justement.
Well, when you're directing, you have a script that's already written. So the script has already been through all those sets of approvals. I mean, what I found when I was directing was that my job was very much trying to read Chip Lynn's mind and film the show exactly as he had imagined it, because he was very particular about how each scene should go, how the performances should be, and what the staging of the scenes were, because he would come to set and be there at the block through of every scene. And if it wasn't how he'd imagined it, he'd jump in and make the directors change it. So as a director on that show, you had to be very flexible and able to change your plans very quickly to accommodate what Mr. Lynn was looking for. But I found I could read the script and visualize the scenes pretty much as Chip had imagined them. Which meant that I think he quickly relaxed with me directing the show, and I pretty quickly got to direct the Dimensions in Danger 25th anniversary special. So he obviously trusted me a reasonable amount. I got to work with all those. I got to work with all those returning legacy Power Ranger actors, none of whom I knew or even knew quite what their role in the whole Power Rangers legend was. I just knew that they were returning characters from the past, and yeah, the whole kind of mystique surrounding Jason David Frank was quite an eye opener when I encountered it firsthand, because I hadn't been expecting it. He was very gracious, and he gave me a signed photograph of himself on the last day of the shoot as a thank you. He also had cameras. He when we were filming, he would set up 3 or 4 DSLR cameras pointing at the set. So he was filming himself filming the show, which was something else I hadn't encountered from an actor before, but was interesting.
Ah, mais il me semble qu'il tournait sa propre web-série, non?
I think that's what it was, yes.
Vous disiez à juste titre que Power Rangers est unique en son genre, unique parce qu'elle crée une nouvelle série à partir d'une autre série. À quoi cela ressemble de devoir travailler avec des images venant des séries Sentai?
It took quite a lot to get my head around at first, to be honest, because there are challenges when you have to drop existing footage into material that you are about to shoot. And also when you are working with two units, a main unit which shoots the acting with the helmets off and where you can see the actors' faces, and the second unit that shoots all the action and the fighting and the stunts, which is basically monsters and when the helmets are on. It's never the actors when the helmets are on, they're always stunt performers. So, and then you've got the Japanese footage. So you've got these three different pieces of the jigsaw that have to fit together as seamlessly as possible. So you work closely as a director on the main unit with the second unit director, talking about the staging of the scenes and where the cut points will be between their footage and your footage and their footage and Japanese footage and so on. Like, are they traveling in a left to right screen direction or a right to left screen direction? What is the frame size? How are you managing the cuts? Where are they? You know, if they're lining up to morph, where is the position of each ranger? Because you might have main unit shoots the first half of the morph when they're still in civilian clothes, and second unit shoots the second half on a completely different day. If you've got the rangers standing in different positions, then you have to go back and reshoot the whole thing because it doesn't work. So that was technically challenging, but also I kind of had to get my head around what Super Sentai was, because I'd never watched it before. I'd never watched Power Rangers before working on the show. So I had to learn about what it was. And you know, Super Sentai is its own thing, and from a Western perspective, never having seen it before, it can seem quite eccentric and unusual to get one's head around. You know, usually it was the Zord footage, but also there would be fight footage that we would adapt. The fight footage is easier to understand when you're new to something. But the Zord footage, to my eyes, when I was first starting, it looked like very large plastic toys suddenly engaging in battle. And just from an aesthetic sensibility, it was so far removed from what I was used to that there was a process of adjustment. Like once I got onto Dino Fury and even Beast Morphers, it was less of a challenge because I got my head around the genre. But when you first come to it without any prior knowledge or experience, it can seem quite unusual and yeah, a bit challenging aesthetically, I think. For me, it was anyway. I was used to kids shows when I was young, like Star Trek and Thunderbirds, and I love shows with spaceships and models. And Star Wars was another thing, but the kinds of shows I was used to watching, I think the depiction of the ships was more realistic or more detailed, naturalistic from a Western perspective, whereas the Sentai depiction of the Zords were unashamedly bright and bold and colorful and designed for children's eyes and different to what I was used to. So there was an adjustment there as well.
Oui, je comprends, quand c'est la première fois qu'on voit ce genre de scène, bon, il faut un petit temps d'adaptation.
Yeah, and I remember the fight scenes with the, was it Beast Morphers? The bunny rabbit Zord, leaping and kicking and scratching itself, and it's just like, it was so funny, and unlike what I was used to with battle scenes with spaceships when I grew up on Star Wars.
Très différent, très différent.
But charming at the same time, you know.
Vous avez travaillé sous deux directions différentes. Avez-vous senti une différence entre Saban Brands et Hasbro?
Yes, I didn't produce the show under Saban Brands, so I started producing with Dino Fury, and Beast Morphers was the first show under Hasbro, but Haim Saban was still very much across Beast Morphers because there was a handover transition period from one to the other. But I did work closely with Chip Lin. When I'd been appointed as his replacement, we had probably a 6-month handover between the two of us where he was passing on his knowledge to me about the show and how everything worked. Haim Saban's ideas about the show were quite prescriptive and quite formulaic. He had a very clear idea of what made a successful Power Rangers episode. And I think it was based on his analysis of the MMPR episodes and what he felt made them successful. And I think one of the curses with Power Rangers as a franchise has been that it was this huge cultural phenomenon back when it started in the early 90s with MMPR, massively successful all over the world. And ever since those first 3 years or so, everyone has been trying to recapture the magic. Despite the fact that I think a lot of that magic was due to the fact that it was new for Western eyes, and that, you know, although Japan had had Super Sentai for some time, it was never well known in the mainstream in the United States and Europe and places like that. So Power Rangers hit the zeitgeist and became enormously successful. And after a few years, that initial kind of wave of success faded a bit because things can't stay fresh and new forever, and the zeitgeist moves on. But I think Haim Saban, since, and I know this through having talked to Becca and Alwyn, who were there at the time, since Dino Charge Season 2, very much said, okay, these are the ingredients that you need. And they involved your Bulk and Skull type comedy duo. And they involved having a very clear moral of the week in each episode. And there had to be at least 2 comedy beats, and there could be no serial storytelling. Each episode had to work as a standalone episode. And those were the main rules. When I was involved in Beast Morphers, there had to be 1 civilian fight per block of 3 episodes. By that I mean unmasked, you know, non-ranger fight. And that was because I think research showed that civilian fights were popular, but they were hugely challenging for production because they had to be shot by second unit, which was the action unit. And if the actors were shooting a fight on second unit, that might take 2 days to shoot. So what does main unit shoot? Well, the answer was main unit shoots the comedy material. So the price for having a big civilian fight every 3 episodes was more Victor and Monty. Because those scenes didn't involve the Rangers and could be shot by main unit. And they were also elaborate kind of gags with quite a bit of complexity of setup and slapstick, and those things take time to shoot. So, you know, we might spend 4 days shooting Victor and Monty material in a block while the Rangers were off on second unit. And which meant that the actual character material involving the Rangers, you know, the character development stories, might only be 3 scenes in an episode, 2 or 3 scenes. Once you've got your two comedy beats, you've got your 2 ground fights and your Megazord fight, which was part of the formula. There wasn't a lot of room for character development. Usually it was 1 scene at the beginning where a character makes a mistake, a scene in the middle somewhere where the complications arising from their mistake come home to roost, and then an apology scene at the end where they explain how they've learnt their lesson and will never do it again. And that was it. So you couldn't actually plan stories for characters that would go across 20 or 40 episodes. You know, couldn't do arcs because there wasn't room. So those were the kinds of restrictions that the show was made under, or that was the perception of what made a successful Power Rangers episode at the time, I would say. And Chip very much was faithful to you know, Haim Saban's requirements. And I know that when we started on Dino Fury, those kinds of expectations were still there. And the way it would work would be that with every idea for an episode, you'd have to write this is this is the message, this is the moral of the episode, and these are the comedy beats. Those were the most important things that would have to be approved. And if the comedy beats didn't make either Haim Saban or later Chip Lynn laugh, then you'd have to go back and rework them. That was the most important thing at the time. But I would say that Hasbro and E1 were much less prescriptive. Haim Saban was no longer involved once we started work on Dino Fury. He was there at the very beginning, and I think he came up with the idea of, why don't you have the Rangers teleport? That was his contribution to Dino Fury, which I think was a great idea, because in Beast Morphers, they had to keep driving up in SUVs, and that just took time to shoot.
Non, mais et en plus, ils avaient un appareil qui permettait de téléporter des trucs.
Yeah, that's right. No contribution to story at all, and inevitably ended up getting cut out in editing for time reasons. So it was just very, very frustrating. Yeah, so teleporting was Haim Saban's idea, and certainly made things a lot simpler in a practical shooting and a story. You can cut to the chase with the action very quickly when they can teleport, so it was good. And right through Beast Morphers, Dino Fury, there wasn't a huge amount of hands-on involvement from Hasbro. The main contribution was the suggestion that we look at the music and modernize the music. And that's where Bert Selen came on board as a new composer. We auditioned, or composers auditioned, and I think we had sort of 7 or 8 people who scored an entire third of an episode as their audition. And he also wrote the successful theme song, because composers auditioned for that as well, for Dino Fury. And I'm very pleased that Bert came on board, because I think his music added a lot in terms of modernizing the show and making it exciting. And he was great to work with, really good. Hasbro brand did insist on the lyrics "Go Go Power Rangers" being incorporated in the theme song after it had been written, approved and finished. So Bert had to go back and add that.
Attendez, ça veut dire qu'il y a une version du générique de Dino Fury sans Go Go Power Rangers?
Somewhere. I don't know where. Probably on Bert's hard drive. I don't have a copy. But that was perceived at the time as being an essential part of the brand, along with its morphing time and various things like that. The different people have different ideas. Like the people who were then working in Hasbro brand moved on, and different people were in Hasbro brand for the second half of Dino Fury and for Cosmic Fury. And when we were developing Cosmic Fury, the idea that the lightning bolt had to be on all the props and costumes was a Hasbro brand idea, but the new people didn't think that Go Go Power Rangers was essential in the theme. So, you win some, lose some. And everyone wants to, in a constructive way, bring their own creativity to a project when they're in charge of it. And that's what happens. People come in, they're a new broom, they see this product that's been around for a long time, and they think, what can I contribute to this to make it better or fresh or new? And I think when I was in the executive producer role, I had 3 completely different teams of people working in Hasbro brand, all with slightly different ideas, all of them smart and great collaborators, and loving what they're doing. So good people, but just swings and the show gets moved around a bit. But first half of Dino Fury, very little oversight, and even through the second half of Dino Fury, there wasn't a lot. There were new people who came in E1 who had to come to terms with what Power Rangers was, because they hadn't worked on Power Rangers before, and that kind of impacted on the final cuts a little bit, because they hadn't been around when we were writing or shooting. But generally, I'd say the people that I encountered from Saban, like Melissa, great people who are still working in Power Rangers. You know, like Melissa works for the Boom Studios comics, and great collaborators. My big regret was that when I took the job on, I thought, fantastic, I'll get to travel to the States for auditions and I'll get to meet all my colleagues over there. And I was really looking forward to that aspect of the job, but then COVID came along and everyone was isolated, and it was very hard to travel between countries, and I didn't get to meet in person most of the people I was working with. So yeah, to answer the question, to summarize the question, when you're making television and you're working on a property that is an international show, with a high value attached to it and people all over the world working on it. I was working with people in France, London, Canada, and California, all of whom were having input into the show. You get a lot of, you know, really good people, very enthusiastic about the show, all of whom want input. And part of my job is trying to juggle all those things and continue to make a show that's good.
Je reviens juste un instant sur les principaux ingrédients à intégrer dans un épisode de Power Rangers que Haïm Saban et Chip Lin ont mis au point. Cela explique beaucoup de choses sur certaines saisons et c'est quand même étonnant à la fois, surtout quand on regarde les saisons sur lesquelles Chip a travaillé, comme Power Rangers dans l'espace ou Power Rangers la force du temps. Dans ces deux saisons, il a justement essayé de s'éloigner de ces ingrédients.
Well, I wasn't around at the time, so I can't talk in detail about what happened. But I think that when Haïm Saban bought Power Rangers back from Disney, and I think Samurai was the first cab off the rank back then, I think that there was more freedom given to the showrunners, but it quickly became apparent, this is what's been told to me, I wasn't there at the time, that things weren't necessarily working as Haïm Saban wanted them to work. And so, you know, after the first, or during the first half of Dino Charge was when he became much more hands-on involved with the show. So there was more experimentation prior to that, for sure. And I think the showrunners were more left to their own devices. And during Disney, of course, Haïm Saban wasn't involved. I mean, I think Chip came on board in the second half of RPM during the Disney era. And, you know, when he talked to me about it, RPM is one of my favorite Power Rangers seasons because it suits my taste. I like it a lot. But Chip's story is that it was regarded as one of the least successful Power Rangers seasons because it didn't work for the target audience. It pleased the adult superfans, but it meant that it didn't sell a lot of toys because children were still the main audience for the show. And the show's always had that split focus between the adult fans who grew up with MMPR and have watched it for many years, and the 6-year-olds who are supposedly the biggest and the most important audience for the show. And juggling those two things has always been a challenge. And Chip's instructions to me were very clearly, you know, if you can please the adult fans, then that's good, but don't spend too much time on them because they're not the main audience. Make something for the kids. And, you know, with beginning of Dino Fury and the end of Beast Morphers, the audience got younger and younger that the show we were instructed to make the show for. Like at the beginning of Dino Fury and the end of Beast Morphers, we were told we should be thinking preschoolers. We should be thinking kids who can't read yet. So we couldn't have any text on screen that wasn't also explained in dialogue because we should assume that our audience couldn't read. So it got very young. It was like 4 or 5-year-olds by that stage. But Hasbro were happier for us to age the audience up a bit to be more 7-8-year-olds by Dino Fury.
Et ça se ressent quand on regarde Power Rangers Cosmic Fury. Parlons un peu de Dino Fury. Cette saison a été écrite comme une seule et unique saison d'une 20aine d'épisodes.
Yes.
Puis on vous a demandé de faire 2 saisons. Comment avez-vous réussi?
It was 22 episodes originally, and that was to finish the Nickelodeon contract in the States that was commissioned for another 22 episodes beyond Beast Morphers. And there was a period there, I think, where Hasbro was searching for a home for Power Rangers, and it didn't have anywhere to go. So they couldn't commission any more episodes without there being, a home somewhere for the show to be broadcast from. And then they did the deal with Netflix, and so Netflix said yes to another 22 episodes. So normally we would shoot 44 episodes at a time, 2 years worth of episodes as one production, every 2 years. It's more cost effective to make more episodes. The fewer episodes you make, the more expensive each episode becomes, because the fixed costs of design, set, costumes, props, all those things get spread across more episodes. If you're only making 10, then each episode becomes really expensive. No change in production value, but just the cost of the episode is much higher. So it always made sense to make 44, because you get two years worth of episodes to hang your toy sales on, and it's much cheaper. So anyway, when Netflix said yes, then we got another 22 episodes, and we'd already plotted the first season of 22 that also might have been 26, although the 26 went away and it became 22 again. And what we had to do was we kept the same overall arcs for the characters that we'd planned, but spread them over the 44 episodes. We had to create a new end of season 1 to come at episode 21. I think 22 was the Christmas episode. So the whole thing about Tarek having Centaura in her tank and the Rangers strapped to the chairs and being zapped by the energy from the statues, all that was invented. That wasn't in the original plan at all, because we needed a high point to finish the first season on. Lord Zed's episodes were introduced. They were never in the original plan. In fact, when we found out that we had another 22 episodes, that was a suggestion from Hasbro. A lot of fans of the show work in the toy division, and they said, "Oh, why did you bring back Lord Zed?" And we said, "But he's been purified. How can we make that happen?" They said, "You'll find a way. You'll find a way. Just bring back Lord Zed." So we did. With a very spurious rationale as to how he could possibly come back, which we've never been forgiven for by some segments of the fan base, but there you go. And yeah, a lot of what would get called filler episodes, which might be just a moral of the week episode that doesn't advance the overall story for either the characters or the team, got sprinkled through the season. But when you've got 2 or 3 consecutive episodes that were as per our original plan, you can feel the story momentum picking up, and like the build to the finale, 3 or 4 episodes building to the finale of Dino Fury were always as planned. Once Lord Zed had been carted off and locked in his crystal prison by the Morphomasters, we were back on track. But what that did lead to, I think, was a slightly unsatisfying sense of the overall rhythm of the season. It didn't flow with momentum, because ideally you want people to keep coming back because they want to know what's going to happen, and the momentum builds and builds and builds. And we weren't able to do that really with Dino Fury because of the late breaking move to 44 episodes. Cosmic Fury, of course, had the opposite issue.
En effet, on en reparlera juste après. Power Rangers Beast Morpher avait commencé à utiliser tout le lore de la série Power Rangers, notamment avec les accessoires de Rangers cachés dans le labo secret. Mais Dino Fury est allé encore plus loin en intégrant les maîtres de la transmutation qui avaient été présentés au tout début de la série. Comment cette idée est-elle venue?
Yeah, I know from talking to Becca and Alwyn that they were frustrated about the way in which the lore was revealed in Beast Morphers. Like, Evox being Venjix, and the backstory and the vault with all the Ranger weapons in it and all that stuff. It didn't really get revealed to the audience until the end game of the season. And I know Becker and Alwyn would have liked to have set it up earlier and explained it more, but they were very much working under the regime that said no serial threads. You can't set up something in episode 2 and have it pay off in episode 14. Each episode has to be self-contained. And they weren't allowed to actually do. The exception to that was like the first 2 episodes, they could be linked, because there's usually too much content to set up a season that you can fit into one 22-minute episode. So first 2 episodes could be serialized, and the last 2 could be serialized. And they managed to squeak that into being the last 3 on Beast Morphers. So they could do it, but it felt very much, where did that come from when you're watching it as an audience member? Because there's been no sense of it from before. And better writing, I think, is to set things up to make the audience guess and speculate and imagine. And when they're proved right, they can feel clever and pleased with themselves because they saw it coming. Or the best thing you can do is prove them right, but then give them a twist so that it is what they thought, but there's something different as well. Because then they don't think, oh, that was obvious, I saw it coming a mile off. They go, oh yeah, I saw that coming, but I didn't see that side of things. You're playing those games with the imaginary audience's mind all the time. So yeah, that was, and Becker and Alwyn, you know, they love Power Rangers, and I think probably share a lot of the frustrations of some of the fans that there are things in the Power Rangers lore that are very unclear or not well connected, and each season very often was its own thing with no reference to previous seasons or how or why. And Becker and Alwyn are very logical thinkers and really wanted to find reasons for the whys and find some kind of consistency that worked across all the seasons of Power Rangers. Bringing the Morphin Masters into Dino Fury was actually Chip Lynn's idea. And it came from Hasbro saying, what can we do to lift things in Power Rangers? What new can we bring in that the audience will enjoy and that hasn't been done before? And so I think Chip came up with the idea of bringing the Morphin Masters in. We'd had a whole list of things that we wanted to do as well, like an LGBTQ character in the Ranger team, for instance, and some other things that didn't happen until later or never happened. But it was really about how can we modernize the franchise. And I think Haim Saban was still around, and Chip was very much laboring under the ideas that had determined what Power Rangers was for so many years under Haim Saban. And I think what Hasbro were looking for was much more of a fresh start. Anyway, the Morphin Masters were what came out of that. And you know, we incorporated them in the first episode of Dino Fury with a whole lot of backstory. And it became pretty clear when they popped in and out that they'd been responsible for a whole lot of the mysterious goings-on in previous seasons.
C'était malin.
Which in some ways makes you think, yes, I knew there was an explanation for that.
Exactement.
But the downside, of course, is you've got these all-powerful beings out there who should be able to step in and fix any problems whenever they occur, and stop those monsters destroying all those abandoned hospitals in the city. Which, you know, the mayhem that those Megazord fights cause would be just terrible. So we always joked about, you know, another monster has grown big in the city by the abandoned hospital. So all those buildings in Japanese footage that you see destroying don't actually have any people in them, because it's a kids show and you can't have anyone really get hurt. Anyway, so that was Chip's contribution. But it's a story killer, having a Deus Ex Machina at your beck and call that you can wheel in. And if you don't wheel them in, then the obvious question is, why don't they come and help? And so we contrived that whole complicated story about the Morphin Masters retreating into the grid and not being involved in human affairs, but Green Morphin Master disobeying the rules and helping out from time to time as a way of explaining stuff. But we knew with Cosmic Fury that we needed to find a way of getting rid of the Morphin Masters, which actually was the reason for the whole story of their energy being captured and Lord Zed wanting it for himself. The reason for us going down that path was to take the Morphin Masters off the table because it would make the stakes so much higher for the Power Rangers team if they couldn't call on them for help.
C'est vrai, c'était très malin d'avoir fait ça dans Cosmic Fury. Vous avez mentionné le fait d'intégrer un personnage ouvertement LGBTQI+, dans Dino Fury. C'était une première pour la série. Est-ce que cela a été facile à inclure dans l'histoire?
It was surprisingly not difficult at the time. We'd been wanting to do it, and we'd been wanting to see as much diversity, equality, representation in Power Rangers as possible. When you've got a show whose core message is anyone can be a Power Ranger, it feels kind of weird that you don't see anyone being a Power Ranger, but you see quite a narrow group of people. So Becca and Alwyn and I were really keen to expand things a bit. And I think Hasbro ran some full-page ads in various trade websites saying something like Hasbro supports diversity, and it might have been Pride Week or something like that. And we went bingo and wrote to the various people in Hasbro saying, you know, it's great to see Pride Week celebrated by Hasbro, and it's fantastic to feel part of a company that is committed to diversity and inclusiveness. By the way, we've been wanting to do this with Power Rangers. What do you think? So it was in the context of the big corporate PR campaign that we raised the idea, and everyone said yes, great idea. They also said, but you need to get it right. So fair enough. So we worked with GLAAD, who are as consultants on the depiction of Izzy and Fern's relationship, and anything in the show that touched on Izzy and Fern as a couple was run past GLAAD at the script stage and at the edit stage. And I think someone called Jeremy at GLAAD that we were dealing with, who was great, and he just said, you know, you're doing good, keep doing what you're doing, no notes. So it was a very easy and constructive relationship. And then, of course, it won the GLAAD Award.
Félicitations.
For children's programming, which was so nice to see. But we didn't do it for the awards. We did it because we wanted kids out there who might feel marginalized or not included to see themselves on screen and feel good about that. It's about representation and inclusiveness. That was why we wanted to do it.
Et merci beaucoup pour ça. Ce genre d'inclusion manquait à la série, alors merci de vous être battu pour ça.
Yeah, I still think the show, it was a foot in the door, you know, it was the thin edge of the wedge, and the show has still got a long way to go to really embrace inclusiveness. And, you know, there are a lot of things in the future that if we'd been able to keep working with the show that we'd have done. But we made a start. We gave Harvey a prosthetic arm in Cosmic Fury, which was another attempt at representing people with disabilities. But in 10 episodes, and for a kids show where you're not allowed to show anguish and pain, it gets challenging. But I still think it was worth doing the story, because there were people there who are differently abled, who might see Harvey and think, you know, there's someone like me, and I could be a Power Ranger too.
C'est vrai.
I'd love to see a Power Ranger in a wheelchair one day, with the wheelchair transforming into some kind of fantastic...
Trop bien,
exactly.
Ce serait super. Une dernière question sur Power Rangers Dino Fury. L'histoire de la saison parle de la guerre de Sporix il y a 65 millions d'années. Les Ravkoniens créent les Sporix pour les aider à combattre une grande menace qui s'approche. Mais cette menace n'est jamais dévoilée à l'écran. Pouvez-vous nous dire qui se cachait derrière cette menace ?
We didn't know what it was. It was so far in the distant mists of time, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Also, the story we were telling wasn't about whatever that battle was. It was really about what happened with Zato and Ion's team and the release of this super weapon. It could have been anyone or anything. Anyway, they died out long ago, unless someone decides to bring them back.
C'est vrai, c'est vrai.
It's that whole thing about be careful what you wish for, and you know, armaments and weaponry. Technology can create things that can unleash horrors that you don't expect without proper forethought or supervision. And that was the analogy. The actual specifics of that war we didn't go into. That's always been one of the challenges, I think, with Power Rangers, when you've got short episodes, 22 minutes 30, is there's always been, I've always seen well, they didn't explain this, or why didn't they put this in the show, or we wish they brought back these characters. And there's a reason for that, which is that if you bring them back, or if you've explained those things, it takes time out of the episode, which is less, it's more time for exposition or backstory and less time for story. And yes, it might satisfy some of the, you know, adult fans who want to see their encyclopedic knowledge of the show make sense, and for them to be able to compartmentalize how all these things fit together. But it's not necessarily very rewarding for a 6-year-old who's got no interest in the backstory or the past or previous seasons. So our approach was always to make each episode as exciting as possible and only go into backstory where it was absolutely essential for story in the present.
Eh bien, tant pis pour nous et merci pour ces explications. Dans la suite de l'interview avec Simon Bennett, on parlera de Toujours vers le futur et de la dernière saison PowerRangers Cosmic Fury. Et on se retrouve très vite pour la suite. C'est tout pour aujourd'hui, j'espère que cette vidéo t'a plu et si c'est le cas, lâche un pouce levé. Et dis-moi en commentaire ce que tu penses de l'interview de Simon Bennett. Profites-en pour t'abonner à la chaîne pour voir d'autres vidéos comme celle-ci et surtout ne rien rater de l'actu Power Rangers. Voici un indice sur la prochaine vidéo. On se retrouve la semaine prochaine. Allez, salut!